Welcome, everyone. This is the second lecture in our lecture series for the fall, the second landscape architecture lecture that we're having this fall. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Serrano. I'm an assistant professor of landscape architecture, and am very proud to introduce Jamie Maslyn Larson this evening. Before we get to that, I just want, for those of y'all who weren't able to join us for the first lecture, explain a little bit about the format. This is a Zoom webinar, which means the attendees, we can see you, we know you're back there, but you don't have audio or video capabilities. However, we do encourage you to communicate with one another via the chat function, which we can also see. And then as you have questions that come up during the lecture, please feel free to post them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And then we'll be able to get to those afterwards. And I do encourage you to post Q&A. Questions do come up so that you don't forget them, or that we have a nice collection at the end of it. I'll start by introducing Jamie. And then afterwards, the student panel here is going to host a Q&A session, either questions that they have come up or ones that are raised in the chat and the Q&A function. They will give voice to those questions for our speaker. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to send me a chat. I can monitor those as we're going along. But without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Jamie Maslyn Larson as our speaker today. She is the Director of Landscape Architecture at the Ruck Ingalls Group, which is a transatlantic firm in Copenhagen and in New York City. Prior to that, she was partner in charge at West 8 Landscape Architecture. Partner in charge of the U.S. portfolio, which included projects such as the Governor's Island Soundscape and the Downtown Brooklyn Public Realm, two amazing projects you should check out if you haven't. Prior to that, she had a 20-year career at other firms, including Hargraves and Civitas, and we're really looking forward to hearing about all of that. She's also one of the 4 co-founders of WXLA, a nonprofit organization that advocates for gender equity in landscape architecture. So we're really excited to hear from her, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her now.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thanks for joining. And I very much appreciate being invited to LSU. I have been reaching out almost every year for 6 years to try to get interns from LSU. So if you're interested, I'm just going to say right off the bat, we would love to have you at Big. There's so much talent. Definitely one of the best programs in the country, and every time I see an LSU portfolio, I'm just wowed. So great job, professors, and great job, students. I just wanted to show you this little backdrop here. I'm going to switch out for a second, but this is Bjarke Ingels here back in 2010. Bjarke Ingels is the firm founder of Big, and I just threw this background because it's kind of funny. But this is a reference to the book, the first it didn't work again. The first monograph, Yes is More, from Big, and we've done monographs every 5 years. And there's there's like this thick. There's a lot of great projects in there, a lot of good inspiration. I've been at Big for almost 2 years now, but I've been collaborating with Big when I was at West 8. I've been since 2012, so about 8 years. But I'm going to switch to a regular background so it's not distracting, and I'm going to share my screen and start to do a presentation, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And I really want to keep this casual and fun and open, so let's do it. Well, let's see what happened. Okay, there we go. One sec. Working off of two things. Okay, you got that? You see the big? Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction of BIG, Bjarke Ingels Group. We are, there's actually 4 offices now. I'm in the New York office. We also have, there's 600 of us, and it's a very multinational kind of feel. There's people from all over the world in each office. So we bring a lot of diversity to our practice in that way. Our offices are in Copenhagen. That's where our firm was founded. New York, which is where I am, and 200 other colleagues. And then we have about a 50-person office in London and a 25-person office in Barcelona. Central kind of philosophy of BIG is to sort of always look at the future and to understand how the future can shape the public sphere or the built realm. And as a result, a lot of our work is in constant evolution and very exploratory. We work in exhaustive ways, iterative ways, and because we're always trying to seek the right solution for the right project. And our firm ideologies are founded in a few different terms that you might have heard thrown around. Hedonistic sustainability, which is basically like the thought, I always kind of reference it like, kind of like the way people would talk about dieting, like you can't have dessert, you know, you can't do this, you can't do this. Well, hedonistic sustainability is more of a philosophy that you don't have to compromise anything in order to achieve success or to achieve, you know, to achieve an ideal state. And it's really drives this sort of it's like this undercurrent of optimism in our firm that we can kind of, through hard work, creativity, and optimism, really solve just about any problem. And it's also very pragmatic, but we don't want pragmatism to be like a downer. So pragmatic utopia is the kind of dumbbell of what we do. There's also a great range of scales of projects that we work on, quite literally the design of light bulbs to the design of entire cities and their future 40, 50, 100 years out. We have a multidisciplinary practice. So in-house landscape, obviously architects, engineers, urban planners, product designers, interior designers. And there's 4 directors in the New York office. These are my peers. And there's 11 partners, there's 7 partners in the New York office. And that includes Bjarke and Sheila, who is our CEO. So this is a little bit off in terms of numbers, but of about 500 bigsters around the world, about 25 to 30 of us are landscape architects or landscape designers, landscape trained. And we don't act like as a silo within the firm. This image really reflects how we work. very dispersed on teams. We're not a department. We are just alongside other team members, working side by side. And that's with great intention, because we do not want to follow a sort of traditional role where architects are somehow set back from landscape architects. And I can tell you, I've spent most of my career working at landscape architecture firms, so-called collaborating with architects, when really what that means is there's a boundary at the base of the building, and you do that and we do this. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. It's been a great thing for landscape architecture because we've been able to develop our own authorship and design. But I wanted to explore a different way of working. And at Big, we blend it more together so that we can kind of create more or less an unbounded way of thinking and use the skill sets of individuals to study anything. So I can chime in on aspects of architecture, and a colleague can chime in on aspects of landscape architecture. And it's okay, because they're talented and I have an interest, and so the territories are dissolving in our firm. And that philosophy has been a part of Big since the beginning. This was a project that's kind of at the roots of Big's beginning. The Maritime Youth House in Copenhagen, very small commission with a low budget. And what Bjarke and his colleagues did when confronted a problem of having to deal with a lot of soil to remediate here, looked at the cost of excavating all of the polluted soil. Rather than that, figured out that they should cap the project, cap the soil, and make the public space this wavy kind of almost hard to decipher where building ends and landscape begins. And whether something is a roof or actually a play space, it doesn't matter to people who use it. So this is the project scales we work at. We work on interior landscapes, everything from that to the spectrum of master planning, like I said, very large cities. And some of our work is 100% building, and some of our work is 100% landscape. So I'm almost overwhelmed with a lot of variety in my job every day, and it's never a dull moment, that's for sure. And right now, our work is all over the United States and all over the world, but in the New York office, we focus mostly on North and South America. And we do public space projects, we do resiliency projects. We've been working with Google for a very long time. And of course, master planning projects. So I wanted to start with a quote that I absolutely love. I'll let you read it, from Ian McHarg, who, he was Scottish, so he kind of had a grumpy point of view on life, but obviously he was a stellar kind of leader in our profession, and really defined what it means to design with nature. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit today, was designing with nature. Ian McHarg was somebody who has always inspired me through my career. And, to be fair, I think humans have always had a very conflicted and complicated relationship with nature. And how we relate to it or design public space within urban areas, there's a lot of different varieties of the way we treat it. And this is a picture of Central Park, which is one of the most incredible public spaces in the world, but there's also this very defined edge between architecture, which is over there, and nature, which is in here. You know, maybe that's a great way to do it, but there's other ways too, and that's what we'll talk about a little bit today. Honestly, like I think about these very simple things that we have to work with as landscape architects. We have like the most limited palette. You know, we have these physical elements like air, soil, living things, sun, water. That's pretty much it. And then we have these processes, right? Seasons, decay, you know, snow. We have geological things that happen. So we have pretty much these two spectrums to work with in order to create landscapes. And if we do it right, we get biodiversity. But it's not that simple. We can't just mix those into a pot and walk away, because we have humans and human perception about nature. And we don't agree on what nature is. We don't have a common view of nature. And the wolf is a very good example of how we have such varying views of our points of view on nature. And actually, people who research this stuff have basically put us, all humans, into little boxes in terms of like how we approach nature. You're either in one of these three camps. You come at it from a biospheric point of view, that like we are all a part of living things, humans and nature and plants and animals, we're all one. Or there's this altruistic point of view, that we as humans have a moral obligation to take care of nature. Or we see it as we are here as humans to basically take advantage or exploit nature, right? We need to use it to our best advantage. And these are like some representations of those people in today's world. So there's Jane Goodall, Greta Thunberg, and of course the Tiger King, or whatever he was called. So like these are like our camps, right? And how we communicate with these groups as landscape architects, you know, you need to be aware that then we're not all talking about the same thing. We all have different points of view, and you need to talk to people in different ways. So if you look at the history of humanity and our evolution, if you will, we've had we've sort of tended to be more on the exploited side of nature. I think we could probably all agree with that, because we can see the results of that. You know, we have this giant population growth, which isn't necessarily a product exploitation of nature, but somewhat, because we've been able to use it to create a more comfortable living environment and be healthier. But we've also, as a result of that, consuming more fossil fuels, and we've increased our CO2. And so that means that these actions have had really hardcore impacts on our planet. And as a result, they've also had hardcore impacts on our biodiversity and on human health. So this is a pretty challenging time. And a lot of people are calling it an existential crisis, that literally our lives are on the line. But there's other more personal impacts that are happening, right? You guys have probably all heard of nature deficit disorder, staring at our computers, which we're doing a lot more of, but has had particularly major effects on younger people, people who have grown up with computers, who sort of have been parked with an iPad in their laps. You have this population of people that are disaffected and actually have no relationship to nature. You got to read these. Okay, these are actual Yelp reviews of the Grand Canyon, 1-star Yelp reviews. I love this one. You'll go ooh and ah for 30 seconds and then feel guilty that you're ready to leave. Whoop-de-doo, Grand Canyon. You were caused by erosion, so you don't have roller coasters or Dippin' Dots. Like, honestly, like, you cannot stand at the Grand Canyon. Well, I can't stand at the Grand Canyon and say these words. So there's a problem. But we know from research that nature is fundamental to humans. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of our DNA. It is when we're near it, when we're around it, and I'm sure you guys have gone on thousands of walks like I have and seen the sunrise and seen the birds and chirping and really feel that connection to nature and how it makes you feel better. So as a designer, I kind of like ask myself, what is my moral responsibility? As a designer, as a landscape architect, what am I supposed to do in this context? And at Big, we feel very strongly that we have the power to give form to the future that we want to live in. So as designers, we feel like we have the power to shape that. And believe me, I've read all the blogs and all the critiques of Bjarke. Everybody's flipping out because he thinks he's an egomaniac, but everybody should try, and that's all we're trying to do. So we're all just giving it a shot. We're giving it our best knowledge to try to do what's right for the planet. And in fact, we have a lot of ways where designers and landscape architects have a chance to work with nature, have a chance to make a difference. And it's not just in the design of public spaces, which I'm going to talk mostly about today. You guys, there's a whole world of opportunity from the skills that you learn in school to really make a difference. You don't have to go to a private design firm. You can work for a nonprofit. You could leverage it into advocacy. You can do pretty much anything with the degree you're going to have. And you can work in all scales and in all sorts of different realms. So as we're trying to do what I'm trying to do my whole career, 24 years, literally my mantra is I want to bring nature to the city. That's all I've ever wanted to do. I've done it for 24 years. We also want to try to transform gray infrastructure into green infrastructure. And I'm going to go through some projects now that'll just put some more visuals behind all these words. The first project is Imagery Resource Center, which we call Copenhagen. This is a waste to energy treatment facility. So if you don't know what a waste to energy treatment facility is, you got to find out, because it's like the coolest thing ever. Like 94% of all the trash in Copenhagen is brought to this plant, and they burn it cleanly, and they make energy out of it, which powers all the homes in loud businesses in Copenhagen. This is incredible. But there was a competition to design this building, and you can only imagine who wants to live next to a waste to energy site. Nobody wants to live next to this stuff, right? Everybody's usually having lawsuits around these types of facilities. So Big designed it to actually be something that's totally icon for hedonistic sustainability. How do you make it something that you could be proud of in your city? And how can you make it something that people can enjoy? So in the conceptualization stage, the idea was that we would take a ski slope. The closest ski slope is a 6-hour drive from Copenhagen, and actually put it on the roof of this building. And this is what it looks like today. There's actually a ski slope there. Even when there's no snow, it can be used for skiing. There's also the world's largest artificial climbing wall and hiking paths and nature on top of this building. So it's really quite an icon for a new way of thinking about infrastructure and public realm. Another project that's kind of from the olden days of BIG, which is not that old, is Super Keelan. This is a project that's really in the heart of Copenhagen and is in a neighborhood that was one of the most violent neighborhoods and also had the highest immigration. So this project was a former kind of back of, it was like a rail yard, backside of some buildings. The competition was to design a very, very low budget public space. And so using paint and asphalt and really DIY kind of hypergraphics, we created this public space which almost overnight transformed this community. And it's really kind of a bold place of bold moves, and very few curated objects that are actually pulled from the community. So during the community process, there were many public meetings, and we asked all these folks from these faraway places to tell us about the icons from their home. You know, what elements or what features in their home country could we bring to this space? And we acted like curators of these icons and of these features. So they show up in the space. This is a kissing bench from Mexico. And the white benches are other kinds of benches from Belgium. And in the background, you can see a really cool play structure from Japan. And these are even palm trees that are from China that can handle the cold winter. And because of it, this is more of like a social infrastructure project. This one is really about bringing community together and showing that community resiliency through the design of this public space. And I was here last summer, and it was just incredibly full, even on a colder day. It's just so full of life because it really represents the people who live there. And so we've also been working here a lot in the United States on some resiliency projects. As you guys know, in Louisiana, it's really the work that we have to achieve for this next generation. And ESCR and the Big U was a result of Hurricane Sandy in 2012. This is what it looked like a few days after Hurricane Sandy hit. At this time, I was working at West State on the Governor's Island, which was in the middle of the New York Harbor. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the Big U, so the Big U was a part of a product out of the Rebuild by Design competition sponsored by HUD and the Rockefeller Foundation. And our project looked closely at Lower Manhattan. And we were inspired by the High Line, where they fused infrastructure and program together. And so we wanted to infuse resiliency infrastructure with program that's for the people. And we had literally hundreds of community meetings where we asked, what do you need? What do you want? What would you like to see here? Just like Super Keelan, Lower Manhattan is not made of just one kind of person or one kind of neighborhood. It's very, very diverse. And so each stretch and each segment of the Big U responds to the needs of the community and the physical condition that exists there. So it isn't one sort of swipe as it's represented here. It's actually quite a diverse array, but it does the job of protecting Lower Manhattan. So we were awarded quite a big chunk of money, and we're able to work on the first phase of the project, which we call ESCR. It's the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. It's about over 2 miles and 62 acres of existing park where about 100,000 residents live nearby. This is how it looks today. And we're going to be breaking ground next spring. So it's really looking at this land that is could be flooded like it was in 2012. You can see the flood line there. And so our plan is to raise the park along the edge, make stronger connections as we do that to tie back to the community so they have better access and easier access. Rebuild all of the programs that existed and more, so that we have this really rich array of programs. So here's what it looks like today. And in the future, it'll have a lot of much richer play, a lot of biodiversity, a lot of but also, build a resilient edge. This is the way that neighbors can access the park today. You can hardly see it. It does not look welcoming. And in the future, there'll be very gracious and open walks over the FDR to get into the park, and accessible walks as well, which are very challenging there. So here it is today. In the future, and obviously during flood, it will do its duty to serve, to protect. Now, another area of interest that everybody's grappling with is the future of aging infrastructure. We hope to see additional funding for a Green New Deal or any transportation bill passed in the future, so that we can take care of some of these remnants. This one is a triple cantilever highway at the toe of Brooklyn as it meets Michael Van Valkenburg's Brooklyn Bridge Park. This is about 60 years old, built in Robert Moses era time. And obviously it really separates the community from the waterfront. DOT, New York DOT came out with a proposal to basically rebuild it exactly as it is in place, and take 10 years to do it. And the community went bananas because it didn't make any sense to rebuild this in place without having even a look at how you could improve it. So the community asked us to come up with a different idea, a different design idea. And we looked back at some historic pictures of Brooklyn and how it used to be sort of like woven, where the city and the waterfront really had blurred lines. And we saw from other cities that when their triple cantilevered or double-decked highways were removed, how it brought back life to the waterfront. So real quick, this is how the triple cantilever bridge looks today, and the kind of edge against Brooklyn Bridge Park. The Van Valkenburg built a giant berm there for noise attenuation. This is how DOT was going to rebuild it. You can see no difference. And so we asked the question, can we change BQE, Brooklyn Queens Expressway, into BQP, and the P is for park. So what our plan shows is basically creating an at-grade deck that is essentially capped and then covered with either local streets, local streetcar, or landscape. And that triple cantilever could be reprogrammed, it could be activated, but most importantly, there would be the ability to bring new connections down from Brooklyn Heights and Carroll Gardens and all the neighborhoods down to the park. There's many different ways we looked at creating connections and opportunities along that edge. It's very flexible. So it can be more straightforward, or we could have like a more wild, integrated, woven park. Actually, this is pretty exciting because in the spring, the City Council ranked our proposal as one of the top plans that they're going to move forward with. So we're pretty excited about that. Now, on a whole nother part of the planet is our recent work in Malaysia. This is called the Penang South Islands Project. And this is a master plan for about 500 new acres of created islands off of the tip of Penang, which is a beautiful island. And you know, this sort of like land reclamation work is challenging. It has its environmental impacts, to be sure. And we were really testing ourselves on what our role could be in creating the most biodiverse and healthiest city of the future. This is an important part of a biodiversity hotspot. A really incredible array of biodiversity here and marine life. It's also an incredibly rich, diverse culture. Chinese, Malay, and Muslim communities through all different kind of walks of life. It's kind of the UN of the Southeast. And of course, what we always do with every project is really try to spend a lot of time talking to people on the ground. And we were really fortunate. This started off last December, so we got to go to Malaysia and talk to people about the issues and their priorities. You're not going to be able to read this, but suffice to say, like, our design principles weren't just words, but we use them as metrics. We use them as metrics to prove to ourselves that we could do better. So every principle was measurable. We were accountable to everything here, whether it was from increasing performative landscapes, biodiversity, having better mobility, or diversity in terms of urban realm. We saw our project as being very much like a matter of scale, so that because we know biodiversity has richness, so we worked really hard to kind of take what is could be a blank slate and break it down into layers, prioritizing biodiversity and habitat creation, corridor connectivity back with the island through land bridges, and underpinning it all with performative landscapes so that water could be handled wisely and used for supporting habitat and regeneration. So this framework was actually built around creating a healthy ecosystem, not just for people, but for marine and aquatic life. Sorry, marine and terrestrial life. And then we sort of backpedaled from there on the built realm. So making sure that the neighborhoods had identities, and each layer of the city actually brought more and more richness, so that people could also feel connected to each other within the neighborhood. And we stitched it together with a very high performing futuristic mobility ecosystem, because we know that cars are on their way out, private cars, and we wanted to plan for that. So we saw this sort of inverse flip where social corridors were happening in habitat areas, but then habitat was also happening where people were living and where cities were existing. So all of this becomes this rich mosaic of blurred lines between landscape and architecture, between habitat and public space. And we're actually starting on that in just a couple weeks with the next phase of work. I thought I'd have a little throwback moment to my days at West State. This was the most important project I've worked on in my career so far, because it was in my hometown of New York. New York. And I also worked for 8 years on this project. And, Malcolm Gladwell says you need to have 10,000 hours to become an expert on something. I calculated once that I had, I think, 30,000 hours on this one project. So believe it or not, I worked pretty damn hard on this. But I was the principal in charge of this project when I was a partner at West State, and started right after the competition. Governor's Island, as Michael Bloomberg said, is the 21st century Central Park. So remember that view I showed where Central Park was this enclosed wall and the city was beyond? This is a kind of a different version, because Governor's Island is on an island where you have to take a ferry to get to it. There's no transportation there other than ferries, and you can't swim unless you're incredibly strong. Please don't. So it was a unique place to build a park. The project is actually a redevelopment project. This island was a military base that was given to the city for $1. And as part of the disposition of that land, the federal government required a 40-acre park and a continuous public promenade around the edge. And the rest could be redeveloped. Well, there's a national monument part, but more or less the rest could be redeveloped. So our client decided that the park would be the first phase of this redevelopment. And this is what it looked like when we got there. It was flat. It looked like a military base. It was never designed to be pleasant. It was never designed for pleasure. It was designed for utility purposes. And then we looked really quickly. Now we started this in 2008. And we looked right away at future flood. This was 4 years before Hurricane Sandy, and maybe you all in Louisiana were studying sea level rise and climate change in 2008, but nobody in New York was. But we were a Dutch company, so we're bringing all those lessons from Rotterdam, for 3,000 years of the Dutch manipulating their landscape for sea level rise. And to be honest with you, when we looked at the numbers, it was pretty dire. This was the predicted flood elevation, and that whole blank slate you see was slated to be redeveloped and park. So we made a plan to actually lift the whole island for the park to survive for the future, some of it to be floodable, but to also set a new datum for development in the future. And our client was like, no way, I'm not paying for fill material. This makes no sense. If New York has these flood problems in the future, then there's bigger fish that they're gonna have to worry about. But we were relentless. We started to talk about it from another point of view, like, oh, well, we just need fill material to shape, the flat site. But actually we were successful eventually in being proactive about this idea of lifting the flood, for the future flood and for development. And we were able to bring in 80,000 in phase one, 80,000 cubic yards of fill material and 80,000 cubic yards of topsoil, which is a lot. And we shaped and sculpted this topography, and we framed it all in this beautiful white precast, which became like eyeliner that really made it look like so inviting and really celebrated and showed off the topography. And you created and framed these sight lines looking off to all these incredible sites in the New York Harbor. And some of these landscapes were lifted to create forests for the future. And we created beautiful program spaces. So you can see here, the first 30 acres was in the heart of the park. and really set the tone for the next phase, which was the hills, the more audacious phase of the project, where we really went bonkers with topography and created the kind of culminating moment of the project. We were able to demolish a lot of buildings that were no longer used by the military and use them as fill material as we began to build these engineered hills. And today, the highest hill is 70 feet high, and there's 3 others that are a little smaller, and they create a real composition of spaces where you can get up high and really see 360 degrees in the New York Harbor, which is incredible because it's one of the few places you can do this for free in New York and see all these views. Okay, let's see. I'm in 40 minutes in here, so I'm good. Okay, good. Now, that was all a bunch of project work, and I want to talk about something that also is close to my heart, which is cultivating biodiversity, cultivating health, cultivating wellness in our profession of landscape architecture. I see Maddie nodding her head vigorously when I was introduced as one of the co-founders of WXLA, and I want to explain that here tonight. In 2016, I quit my job at West State. You can read about that in Landscape Architecture magazine if you're interested, but coincidentally, 3 other women leaders at very high profile firms also quit their jobs in 2016. A couple of these, I knew Gina Ford over here on the left very well, but I didn't know Cinda Gilliland or Rebecca Leonard, and I knew her husband, who's also a landscape architect, Stephen Spears, pretty well. Well, coincidentally, we all quit our jobs in 2016, and it was for a common reason. It's because we all felt marginalized by our firms, marginalized as female leaders, and were very confused. For me personally, there were changes, management decisions being discussed at that time that were frankly unacceptable to me and really disappointing. So I quit. Coincidentally, these other women quit too. And in 2017, we had a panel discussion together about our experiences. And through a lot of deep conversation amongst each other that lasted about 3 months, we kind of came up with some common understandings amongst us that we felt we had talked to a lot of other women. We realized like this wasn't really something that was our fault. Things were hard and there were reasons behind it. And this is just a short list of why a lot of women have not moved up in the firms that they have been at. And I'm not saying every firm is like this. I'm just saying some firms and maybe some women. May not be every woman, but for us, this is what we experienced. We felt that the magnitude of bias grow as you become a stronger leader in your firm. We felt that there was a sort of myth of a singular design personality, which didn't recognize other types of leadership. Say, like my leadership as a partner at West State wasn't very well recognized nationally, whether it was in getting requests for speaking engagements or whether it was being recognized by ASLA. There was lack of flexibility for working parents, men and women, but the brunt of it falls on the shoulders of women, that's for sure. We as women have to work harder to explain or prove our perspectives. There's a culture inherent, a cultural bias inherent in many firms, if it's male dominated or white male dominated, which they most are, where many are, the leading firms are, where our perspectives, which are different, aren't sort of recognized as being valid. So we had to work harder to explain that. And then, you know, fundamentally, because of all of this, we had to work harder. It wasn't just the work we had to do, but we had to work hard to exist in this culture. And at the end of the day, it was very hard. You know, if sexual harassment happened, and I was never really sexually harassed in my firm. I've been sexually harassed, but not mostly by clients, to be honest. But within my firm, sexual discrimination is really, really hard to prove. So there's very little recourse. There are some women that are doing incredible work, and I just want to go through what the Vela Project has been doing. This is the work of TJ Marston, Samantha Solano, and their colleague, Catalina Dungand. And they're actually bringing data to this, and I think it's really important that you all know what's happening in our profession, and not because knowledge is power. So no doubt, I'm sure in your classes, there's national trends, and it's been a trend for a while that women in landscape programs are dominating. There are more women in undergrad and grad programs in the United States than ever before. And that's been a trend for a while. So that's awesome, right? Women are winning more awards than men are, which is great. We're being recognized. We're being recognized on our merit, on the work that we're doing, on the research that we're doing, on the designs that we're doing. Then something happens once you join the practice, once women join the practice and you work for a few years and you start to get ready to take the LARE, all of a sudden there's a drop off. Women are only 47% of the people that are actually applying to become licensed landscape architects. And then when it becomes, then completing those tests and exams, there's a huge drop off of licensed landscape architects. All of a sudden, the number of women that are licensed drops down to 27%. And another way that leadership is shown is in chapter presidents. There's only 32% of women that are chapter presidents in their state or in their region. And embarrassingly, there's only, in ASLA, there's only 16% representation of women. And that number is increasing. You can see the bar at the bottom, the number is increasing, but it's not increasing fast enough. There are a lot of women landscape architects who deserve to be fellows. And then women-led practices are not receiving enough awards. And it might be because they're not applying. It might be because they're not being recognized. A lot of work has to be done to figure out why this is happening. So you can see the Vela's graphic here is just so really rich and easy to understand, even though there's this ladder, this strong ladder at the bottom for women in landscape architecture. It really tapers when you get to the top. So we formed WXLA, we being me, Gina, Rebecca, Cinda, and Stephen, to work hard to support the change that needs to happen. We started by doing something really simple and powerful, which is to create a change.org petition, where we made a strong but clear statement about what we think needs to happen. And you guys can sign this today. There's actually almost 5,000 signatures on this. But it's basically saying, like, we as firm leaders, we as designers, we as colleagues stand for diversity in our profession, and we will support the growth of women in our profession, and we're going to commit to it, and I'm going to sign it. We asked people to do that. We also, as I mentioned, had our stories reported in Landscape Architecture magazine. They did a 9-page spread. It goes deep into some of the issues that we experienced and what we think are the common threads about changing this dynamic. And then we started an Instagram page. Seemed simple. We started by celebrating women-led practices. Some friends we had, and we actually asked people to nominate other women leaders. And we just said, hey, here's some faces of landscape architecture leaders and women leaders in our profession, because there just simply aren't represented and shared enough. And then we did something that we thought would be pretty cool, which was to start a scholarship. And this scholarship was meant for, not for students, but for women who were, like, say, 3 to 10 years out. It's a real vulnerable time. We saw from that Vela data that a lot of women start leaving the profession, after a few years in the profession. So we wanted to focus on this target group and do a scholarship that would pay for women to go attend ASLA. So last year, we had 7 scholars, and this year we had 11 scholars, and we raised $40,000 in cash and in-kind donations. These are our scholars. Next week is the Revisit ASLA conference thingy, live, whatever, virtual thing. So we're gonna have 11 scholars attending that. And last year we had 7 scholars attend ASLA in San Diego. So, and to be honest, this was a great mix of it wasn't just women, but there were women who were in academia, women who were in public practice, women who are in private practice, women who are in established firms, women who are just starting their own firms. So even within this diversity, we had diversity. We really tried hard to, we had jurors pick it. We didn't pick them, but we encouraged our jury to think about all kinds of diversity. So yeah, we had this convening last year in San Diego. We had 150 people attend. So we have 3,000 followers on Instagram, and we're really at the starting line of this whole thing. And we're really gonna take this all the way. And we're super excited about expanding our reach. So I started with this, really kind of depressing but inspirational quote from Ian McHarg. But I don't think we're at a point where we should be too depressed. You probably have seen these similar kind of narratives happening this summer, and as we've been facing COVID, out of these challenges, innovation happens. And a lot of these innovations happen in our public realm. So with the cholera epidemic in London, it actually created a whole new infrastructure which supported the whole public realm of London. Our overcrowding and sort of disease of the Lower East Side in New York and other cities created a whole new parks infrastructure in our cities. Of course, the devastation of World War II was an opportunity to create, brand new infrastructure for better or for worse. After 9/11, we had enhanced security, which is created a new form of public realm. And of course, we already talked about the impacts of Hurricane Sandy, and of course, all the hurricanes that have been happening even more every year since Sandy, and how it's creating an opportunity for new flood protection and public realm. So you guys, you're at the starting line. This is your future right here. What is the post-COVID world going to look like? What is the results of all of this in racial justice going to look like? This could be the opportunity to really create a reimagined public realm. And it really, 2016 election hit me hard, and this recent elections hit me hard too, but it really reminds me that the more that we can act locally and really work with our communities and do small acts, it might seem overwhelming, but really breaking it down into small chunks, like Killer Mike says, it'll feed your soul and make you feel pretty inspired every day. So try not to be overwhelmed. You can do it. We can do it. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. That was an amazing lecture, very wide-ranging and inspiring. Thank you so much for taking the time to prepare that for us.
It was really fun. I mean, how often, like I said.
Exactly.
Preach.
So now we have some time for a Q&A. I mean, I'm sure some of the attendees have to run out a little early, but we're going to hang out here probably until 6:30 our time. If anybody has any questions, I think we'll start with any of the student panelists. If you have a question you want to ask, or something that you wanted to talk to Jamie or have her expand on a little bit more, please, go ahead and unmute yourself and have at it.
I'll go ahead. I thought of one at the beginning and I've been hanging on to it. So I liked your graphic, how you showed like the outside of the building is what we do. But so often in studio, whenever we would get projects, we would have to design the buildings, and that threw me through a loop, at least, as I'm sure a lot of the younger kids. So do you have any lessons whenever you transitioned to big and it was more multidisciplinary, your experience with that?
Wow, what's interesting is I guess I didn't know how little I knew about architecture. I didn't, it made me realize how narrow my view was. And when I learned more about architecture, when I talked to my colleagues about how they create space, it really has had me reflect on the way I think and create space. And sometimes we're looking at each other thinking we're saying the same thing, but then we realize we're not. And it's these moments where language is really important, and drawing is really important for creating that kind of common value or common understanding around what the goals and aspirations are around a project. So I think that if I were to design a building, which I don't, but if I were to, sometimes I draw something and I stick it in front of them, but if I were to design a building, I would really encourage you to think about the experience from like eye level, like how does it feel, instead of designing from plan view, which is of course an important part of the process, but almost immediately go into 3D and try to think about the experience from eye level. Creating big, wild shifts in scale, can be fun because you can, and Frank Lloyd Wright was really great with that. You know, has anybody ever walked into a building by Frank Lloyd Wright? You walk into this like little tiny portal, and I'm only 5'3", and I feel small and compressed. And then you walk into this big volume. So thinking about architecture as a series of rooms and experiences helps you break it down. Thinking about it from eye level and human scale. I mean, I used to just walk into a building and kind of like la-ti-da, go about my business. But now I really think about how the architect has composed these spaces. And, you know, to be honest, it's kind of fun because I've spent 24 years thinking about outside space. Now it's like I'm thinking about a whole different kind of space, and I don't know how it's going to affect me. I still love landscape architecture. I'm never going to be an architect, that's for sure.
Thank you.
So it looks like we've got a few questions. Let's see. Carlos would like to ask you, what are your thoughts about academic institutions' role or responsibility about landscape designers' moral imperative to tackle inequalities or inequities? How do we learn or teach this within the classroom environment to prepare young professionals?
Well, Carlos, I think I said it, maybe I didn't say it strongly enough. I feel we have a moral obligation. I feel very strongly we have a moral obligation because we affect people's lives by what we do. If you work in the public realm, if you are a policy maker, whatever way that you are planning to be a landscape architect, what you do shapes people's experience and lives. So the first and most important thing that we have to do is listen. You know, stop talking and listen. And it's number one. Let people say their words and accept it and believe them. And to me, the pace at which we go has to go at the pace in which a community is comfortable. And that is not often what, let's say, you know, developers or you know, city staff or leaders don't always want to go that way. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go slow or it's going to go bad. I think if you do 1 and 2 right, then 3 could happen pretty smoothly. But if you're not listening and you're not believing what people say, you're not responding, then you're not going to have a good environment. And when I say environment, I also mean a work environment. I mean, these words I'm saying aren't really necessarily about design process. It's also about creating community, and creating a community, whether it's in your studio or in my office or and so on. So mostly I think everybody thinks they're right too much or really wants to push their ideas and doesn't spend enough time listening. And that's really what's cool is you think about how where the opportunity is in co-creation, they call it. It doesn't mean that you don't get a sense of authorship. It means that you actually just have a new challenge to actually try to make something that is, because you're still the designer. You're not asking somebody to design something. You're still a designer, but you are trying to create something with someone in a way that's supporting their values and their goals and their ideas. It's not business as usual, and that's what needs to happen.
To piggyback on that, I'm wondering if there are some ways or methods of listening that you found to be super effective for a particular project.
I think that you have to have all ways. So, because, you know, think about the types of, I mean, okay, I don't mean to be like, there are people who like to attend meetings, town hall meetings. There's those kinds of people that just really like to show up and see a presentation and raise their hand and da, 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 da. You know, that method works for certain types of people. There are also hands-on workshop kind of formats where visually oriented people or physically, you know, people who understand space, who like to shape place, they work better in that way. So we use models a lot. And models are helpful because a lot of people don't understand scale or space or transformation. They can't, you see a rendering and they can't, you know, it takes a lot of work. Even I have a hard time connecting the dots between a rendering and what exists. So models are really helpful. But then one-on-one meetings, sometimes you just have to be, you know, if you're meeting with a city manager, sometimes you just got to meet one-on-one so that they can just share the behind the scenes stuff confidentially. And then, but think about it, that there's literally nobody under 30 that goes to public meetings anymore. I mean, nobody. I mean, okay, maybe some, but somebody, they're probably doing it as some kind of high school homework assignment and they really don't want to be there. So there needs to be a lot of different ways, and there are different ways to reach out to folks using, you know, of course, now that we're all sitting at home, using technology and using gaming technology to have more participatory processes with folks. So I think you literally have to, obviously there's also an issue of language, culture. Mm-hmm. It's not enough to be bilingual. You've got to be multilingual. You have to go to the churches. You have to go to the places where people are instead of expecting them to come to you. So there's thousands of ways that we have to do better. And a lot of times we just do this like word on the street thing, you know, we just kind of like walk up to people and have conversations, and it's anecdotal, it's not scientific, but you do get a sense of how people are feeling. And that supplements the data-driven stuff where you can do surveys and stuff like that. So it is really important you do it all if you want to be genuine.
Thank you.
Do any of our other student panelists, you don't have to have a question to ask, but I just wanted to give everybody another chance before we pick another one from the Q&A section.
I have a short question that's kind of more specific to the presentation. So we were talking about those resilience parks in New York. I just kind of wanted to know if there were any aspects of the design that kind of allowed those parks to like bounce back after a flood, or if they were designed primarily for like as like a buffer against the floods. Like, is there any way that they like are built for like to withstand the floods, like design aspects for that?
Yeah, there are. And not ESCR is actually whole 100% raised, and it's kind of a drag. We really tried to push the city to do parts that were floodable, but they just didn't. But on Governor's Island, we have parts that are floodable, and those are the sports fields and so the lawn areas, the turf grass areas. So those can be flooded, and then of course, you know, pretty quickly recovered. And of course, Van Valkenburg's Brooklyn Bridge Park has some nice floodable parts. The tidal estuary landscape. Hunters Point South by SWA and Weissman Freddy has some epically beautiful wetland parks and tidal marshes and floodable as well. So come to New York, let me know. I'll send you a map. You can visit all of the really great resilient projects that are happening around the perimeter. You know, of course, Scape is doing some projects. They're working to get their projects on building a living seawall, I think in Staten Island. So that's going to be 100% flooded all the time. But it's going to be, you know, protecting Staten Island from wave attenuation, you know, and scouring that can happen. So.
Oh, Emily, I think your volume wasn't coming through. Not very, very faintly. Maybe it wasn't coming through. Did anybody else have another question you wanted to pull through?
You want me to check the Q&A?
Well, I can pull one while Emily's doing that. Marwan had a question here about pulling up on the, you know, the unrest, some of this current social unrest that's happening in our society. How does spatial design, what are some of the opportunities for spatial design to create change in fundamental issues such as systemic racism in the built environment? And where, as designers, do you think we can start?
Well, that's very complicated, but important. What we have done in the past has not served, well, let's just say what we've done in the past has served a very narrow audience of people. It's generally, you know, obviously been white and affluent, and a lot of the work that has happened in landscape architecture, and I'm complicit in this because I work, you know, we just sort of follow where the money is, right? So a lot of the work has been in basically real estate development. So a lot of waterfront projects, a lot of, you know, brownfield site contamination repair, or, you know, these sites that were working waterfronts or contaminated sites. Who were they renovated for? Who were they restored for? They were restored for a certain class of people. You know, look at all of New York City's waterfront. Who is it for? Look at, you know, Chattanooga. Look at, you know, like almost any waterfront across the United States is built for communities that are not communities of color. They don't include meaningful affordable housing, and in fact have pushed a lot of communities to, you know, live further out from the cities where jobs are. So we should do the opposite of what we've been doing, which is basically, unfortunately, entirely dependent on capitalism. Okay, so now I'm getting crazy, but, you know, it is really like a matter of public policy to shape these issues. We cannot rely on private sector to solve these problems for us. So we need leadership that believes in the values, that wants to that wants to create a balanced and equitable society that will prioritize projects and initiatives that benefit folks of, that live in poverty or even middle class, and those kinds of projects aren't necessarily mutually exclusive of other projects. It doesn't have to be a net sum game. You can have one and the other, and imagine what the world would look like if we were to sort of change our frame of mind about who are our communities for and who are our cities for, and instead of saying they're for this community that we've always worked for, like let's give a little love to communities that haven't had the benefits of the past. Internally, as a profession, we have not reached out vigorously enough to, you saw the data on women. It's not even, there's not even data on minority. It's so bad that nobody's even measured this stuff in our profession. The ASLA has totally failed, in my opinion, to really do a good job in terms of diversity and outreach. And and that's because of the leadership. Look at the representation. Like, we got to change that. So we need to bring more diversity into our profession. I hope you guys have a great group of folks in your department, and continue to fund scholarships and continue to reach out to people that you think might enjoy landscape architecture, introduce them to it. Be proactive in your communities and trying to bring people in, because it has to happen from the bottom up as well as the top down.
I think to tag along with that as a way of closing out here in part, we think of landscape architecture as like a service profession, a profession that provides a service. And what inspires me so much about some of the things that you do and some of the things that other people who are shaping the field is that we don't think about it just as a service, but as an advocacy, right? It's a profession that's advocating for things, and not all the things we advocate for are going to, pay the bills, but the profession is larger than that. And it's not always how do we solve it based on a service that we provide, but how do we advocate into the field? Does that make sense?
But we're not nonprofit, right? There's not a lot of landscape architects in public sector, and I don't know the numbers, but there's not a lot of the draw in our profession is private practice. That's where the money is. That's where the jobs are. Like, it would be great if every city had like a landscape architecture department, because we could really, have an impact, I think, to your point about service, about advocacy. It's very hard. I've been in private practice my whole life, and it's very hard to have a platform of advocacy, when you're in private practice. And, it can be a distinction, you could make it a distinction or kind of like brand, and folks are doing that, right? Like, you guys saw David Rubin, and he's doing some good work too. And of course, Gina's firm, Agency. There's some great firms that are using advocacy as their brand, but it would be great if we had more opportunities for people who want to serve to truly do that in public sector.
It's getting right at 6:30, so we should wrap up, but I just wanted to give you a final opportunity to add any kind of closing thoughts, or any of the students who had one more question they wanted to ask.
I did have a very general question. It's like, in my idea, Big is always working on, like you said, facing the future and kind of regarded as a pioneer in the area. But sometimes we will be criticized like it's not practical enough. It's sometimes it's just some concept and idea. How do you think this question?
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, I'm saying like when Big is always facing the future and using some ideas that thought might be crazy and trying to facing the future. Sometimes we are criticized that these are not practical enough. How do you think this question?
You know, I don't think our projects are. I mean, look, if you practical is important, but dreaming is also important. And it is it's hard to I think it's harder to imagine or create the future than it is to solve problems. And so maybe some of the ideas are far-fetched or Looney Tunes or, you know, but a lot of great architects of our time and designers of our time had ideas that were way ahead of themselves, right? Buckminster Fuller, or, you know, why can I only think of Buckminster Fuller? But and so there, I would just say, like, if your ideas are like anchored in some logic, a rational analysis, which we never ever we always do deep analysis to truly understand what's the problem we're trying to solve, what's the core problem. And if you understand what the true problem is you have to solve, then you can kind of go, you can really figure out an array of solutions from pragmatic to aspirational. You know, so I don't know if that's answering your question, but I would just encourage you to do both, right? Like, solve the pragmatic, but don't stop there. You know, keep thinking. What we do internally is we say, all right, we solved the problem. Great. Now, let's try it again. So let's just start over. And we don't stop at solving the problem. Even if we like it, we say, well, what would it be like if we did this, you know? So, and sometimes that leads to new ideas. Sometimes we go right back to where we were, but a part of the design process is getting to that solving the problem faster, so you have more time to be inventive.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we need to wrap it up now, but please join me in thanking Jamie for being with us this evening and for hopefully having you again here soon sometime, maybe for some reviews.
It'd be great.
Thank you, Jamie.
All right,
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. It was wonderful.
Bye, guys.
Amazing.